Hi, I'm Cody DeLong with Mastering Light, and today I want to give you just a few tips for working from reference photos when painting. You know, a lot of times we're out and about, we see some fleeting light effect, something that you're just not going to capture in plain air. And so what do? Of course, you pull out your phone and you take a photo, right? But then you get back in the studio and you start looking at the photo and you realize, there's a lot going on. It's complicated and you need to simplify the scene to make a bolder, stronger statement. But where do you begin? Well, that's what we're going to talk about right now. Are you ready? Let's go. So I have here a photo that I took while mountain biking a couple years ago with some friends in Sedona. It was a cloudy day, but we had some of those little sun rays peeking through the clouds, and it created this wonderful light effect on the far wall here. It was very dramatic, and in fact, that's what made me stop riding and take the photo. So let's talk about a couple of things that I like to do in Photoshop when I'm preparing or working on a reference photo that I'm considering for a painting. Of course, the first thing I do is I come up here to View and Fit on Screen, because why not look at it larger, right? And the next thing I like to do is think about if I need to crop the image. So in this case, our story is here in the back wall. How much of this wall do I need to tell that story? And I'm wondering if I can't just zoom in on this a little bit. And maybe I don't need quite as much foreground either. We could cut that back a little bit. Let's see what that looks like. And yeah, I think that improves the composition a little bit. I often like to shoot these images a little bigger and give myself room to crop later. Now the next thing I want to do is think about my value plan. A lot of times when we take our photos, even with our wonderful cell phones, our modern technology, the camera has to choose an exposure. And often the darks are a little too dark and the lights are a little washed out. So one of the first things I do is I come up here to Image, Adjustments, and then I go down here to Shadows, Highlights, and click on that. That automatically lightens the shadows by 35%, which is way too much. So I bring that back down around 8 or 9% typically, depends on the scene. Maybe this one I could lighten up a little more. We'll try 12%. And then I'll darken the highlights just a little bit. And I see what's happening in the sky here. I'll go too far just to show you. That really adds a lot of drama by darkening the sky, 8 or 10 points. That makes a big difference. Now, let's go back and look at where we were, which is right there. And then with our shadow highlight adjustments, now that's much more pleasing, I think. Now, the next thing I think about are the big shapes. And in this scene, of course, we've got our big wall here. And we've got our trees. And then, kind of this middle distance that's all in shadow, and the sky, of course. So what do we want to do with this? Well, first of all, the trees in the foreground are boring. They're not, there's nothing exciting going on. They're all kind of a similar height, size, and shape. So for example, I might leave these two alone. They're pretty good. But maybe I would take this grouping over here and perhaps I'd bring up something a little taller over there, and then, keep, like I said, keep these guys sort of where they are. And, maybe I'll make this guy a little taller also. Something like that might just frame that wall a little bit better. So that's what I would work on in my thumbnail sketch, which we'll do next. But for now, the only other thing I might do in Photoshop is I might play with the saturation just a little bit. So if we come up here to Image, Adjustments, and come down to Hue and Saturation, and we just maybe bump up the saturation just a little bit, maybe 7 or 8 points, and that's probably enough. I don't want to overdo it because I know my own tendencies, and I tend to push the color anyway. You know, even if the photo is fairly gray, my inclination is to push color. So I don't want to overdo that in the photo. So that's about all I would do with this photo. You know, I try not to manipulate these too much in Photoshop. I think you can just go too far with it and it starts to look unnatural. But I am already thinking about the composition and how best do I tell this story. In other words, the sky here is playing a supporting role. The foreground plays a supporting role. We've got this dark area that separates foreground from background, which is nice. But this is our story right here. And everything else is just playing a supporting role. So we need to keep that in mind as we start our thumbnail sketch. So let's do that now. So here is the sped up version of my thumbnail sketch. And you can see I've changed the proportions and zoomed in even a little more. This would be a sketch for a smaller painting, you know, maybe 9 by 12 or 12 by 16, something like that. I'm adding some shading here, working out my basic value plan, the lights and darks throughout the scene. I've resculpted the trees, as you can see, adding just a little bit of detail into the wall and making sure to keep the focal point, the lightest and brightest point within the sketch. And here's the final sketch. I hope it was helpful. If you'd like to learn more about the Mastering Light program, visit CodyDeLong.com.